Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's been a little while since we've been together, but today we're going to actually round out all of our talking about reading different rhythms and really get down to using them today. We're going to review what we did last time. We're going to take a look at some more challenging examples today, and then, most importantly, we're going to stop talking about reading and writing and actually plug these into a drum machine over there on BandLab and show you how we can connect these two worlds together. So let's get right into it. All right, guys, welcome back to another week here. Hopefully you've been doing pretty well. Remember, if you ever fall behind on this cheat sheet, you can always go back and find the previous week's lessons that I've added up to this on our class pages on Unified Class. Remember, I always post the old links there. So just to pick up on what we talked about last week, we've now talked about eighth notes, 16th notes, and rests. And hopefully we can remember at the end of last week, we learned how to use these rhythm syllables to apply to counting rhythm, like quarter notes equal ta, eighth notes we say TT. And for a rest, we just have to figure out what type of rest it is. This is a quarter rest, which just like a quarter note, we would write ta, but we put in parentheses. The parentheses mean that this is going to be silent because a rest, of course, means that there's not going to be any sound. It's just a symbol for silence. Also last week, we talked about how to actually add the numbers counting to this, the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, where of course eighth notes, the first one's a number and the second one has a plus sign, which means and, because it's halfway between beat 1 and 2, between beat 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and so on. So this is all we talked about last week. So hopefully this looks familiar to you from the end of last week. This, of course, was our exit ticket from last week. So let's take a look at this. Let's get into it. Well, let's just make sure we answer this so we're all on the same page. Now, I saw some great answers last week on the Padlets, and thank you for that. But there was also a few answers that had me a little bit concerned. So let's just make sure we know. If we go back to our cheat sheet, we will see that a quarter note, we're going to write ta for our rhythm syllable. If I'm asking for the rhythm syllables, quarter note means ta. Remember, eighth notes mean TT. You'll remember that when we see 16th notes, we're going to write T-ka, because between each of these eighth notes, we're going to write the ka. So T-ka. So now we can go ahead and formalize off what we did last week. Now, of course, for number 2 here, this is 4 beats of music. We have 2 quarter notes. So let's go ahead and we're just going to write ta above all of our quarter notes here on number 2. And then, of course, these are eighth notes and these are eighth notes. And whenever we see eighth notes, each note, we're going to write T above it. So this should be ta, T-T, ta, T-T, which of course should sound something like ta, T-T, ta, T-T. That takes us right through there. Okay, so now for number 3, this will be pretty straightforward. Remember, quarter notes get ta, so we're going to go ahead and just write ta, and ta. And then don't forget, we got eighth notes at the end, and like we just said, each of these, we're going to write T. So we have ta, 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 T-T. And if we add some beat to that, it'll sound like ta, 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 T-T. Which brings us down to number 4. Now, we've got a quarter note here. We've got a quarter note here. We know these are eighth notes, so we can just go ahead and put the T-T right there. Now, of course, what I was looking for last week, and this is where a few people got off. Some people wrote some different things. Remember, like I showed you, whenever we have a rest, we're going to write the type of rest it is. So this is a quarter rest. We write ta, and then put it in parentheses to make sure everybody knows it's silent. So now that we know this is a quarter rest, like I mentioned before, we're just going to label it the same way as a note would be. Now, a quarter note's a ta, so a quarter rest would also be ta, but the difference between these two is this is sound, this is silence. So what we do for silence is we put the syllables or anything that has to do with counting, whether it's syllables or numbers, we put those in parentheses. So we would still mouth the syllable ta, but we wouldn't actually make any sound with it. It would be silent. So this would sound like ta, ta, T-T. All right, ta, ta, T-T. This is still a ta. You still got to count that beat because this beat still exists in music, and you would have heard to click on the metronome, but this right here has to be no sound from whatever our instrument is, which is for now either our mouth or our hands if we clap. Okay, so now we can move on. That was last week's. Let's get into this week. All right, fresh week. Here we go. So this one, guys, we're actually going to do these together today. We're going to talk about how we count these, how we clap these, and we're also going to take a look at how we can actually put these into a drum machine today. So we're going to go through each one of these. So first off, for number 1, everything is the same type of note. And hopefully you remember from last week that these are called 16th notes. Now, of course, each 16th note is worth a quarter of a beat. So if we put 4 together, 1 quarter plus 2 quarter plus 3 quarter plus 4 quarters equals 1 entire beat, but we need 4 different notes to add up to that beat. And remember, the difference between 8th notes and 16th notes, 16th notes have 2 beams across the top because of the 2 flags, whereas 8th notes have 1 beam across the top because of the single flag on an 8th note. Because of this, we know that these are all 16th notes. We also should remember that the syllable for counting 16th notes is tika tika. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to label, alternate between T and ka, K-A. Okay? Now different teachers may tell different ways to count this. Some people go tiri tiri, but I find tika tika goes very nicely. It's a very percussive sound, so we can really feel the beat with the syllables that we say if we use tika tika. So I'm a big fan of that. So we have tika 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 all the way down across, okay? Now what I hope you guys realize here is that every other syllable is T, which of course is a nod to the fact that these are 8th notes, because the ka is just a note that's going to go between each 8th note. So that's really all it is. Let's go down to number 2 here. Of course, these are all quarters, so we can just go ahead and write ta for everything. But am I done? No, because this one and this one are both rests. So remember, like we said a minute ago, rests go in parentheses. The parentheses just let us know that these are silent. So if we take a look at number 3 here, we should automatically realize that these are 8th notes. So we can just go right ahead and write the T, T. All right, T-I, T-I. Now, let's take a look at this real quick. So last week when I talked about rests, I did mention this one. This right here, if we take a look at last week's notes, we'll see that this right here is what we call an 8th rest. And just like a single 8th note, it is worth 1/2 of a beat. Now, usually we see 8th notes, they're together. So we have 1/2 of the beat and the other half of the beat. So they come together as being one beat together. But with each of these or this being 1/2 of the beat, we have to take a look at that now as we approach this. This together is 2 8th notes equaling 1 beat. We have to look at each of these as a separate 8th note itself, but each one is written separately because one is silence and one is sound. So we're still going to label them as T, T, but because that's an 8th rest, we label it T, parentheses. Anytime we have an 8th rest, we're going to label it just like an 8th note, T, but we put it in parentheses. No parentheses, rest gets parentheses. So as we finish this one, it really just says T, 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 but some of the T's are silent. So this should sound something a little bit like this. T, 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 T. Listen to that again. You can really hear the click of the metronome happens where these rests are, and these notes are what we call the upbeat after each of the beats. T, 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 T. If we move on down here, this one's going to be a little bit more simple as long as we take into consideration what was going on here. This is really the hardest one we have, so number 4 should be a little bit easier here. Quarter note, give it a good old ta. Everything else here is some sort of 8th notes. Now, of course, we should be pretty familiar now with a group of 2 8th notes together. T, T. We should be familiar with that. But based on this last one, we can now tell that each of these are an 8th something. So 8th rest, give its parentheses, 8th note here, no parentheses. And we do that right over here as well at the very end. Parentheses for the rest, nothing for the note. So this one should be ta, T, 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 T. Let's hear how that sounds like in context. Ta, T, 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 T. I still count these T's, I just keep them, I don't say them out loud. If I were to really whisper, it would sound something like this. Ta, T, 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 T. Hopefully you can hear that, but that's really what we have. Now this gets kind of tough when we start having a lot of these rests in here, a lot of what we call syncopated rhythms. So instead of doing it like this, let's write it another way. When we get back together here for part 2, we're going to take a look at exactly how to count these rather than saying the rhythm syllables. So stick around, I'll see you guys in a little bit.